Hi everyone, welcome back to my channel. I'm Huck. Today I'm doing a review of Lady Hotspur by Tessa Gratton. This is an adult high fantasy that is a retelling of Shakespeare's Henry IV. This follows multiple perspectives, but our three main characters in this are three lady knights who are Hal, Banamora, and Lady Hotspur. At the beginning of this book, there is a rebellion and they are taking over the kingdom. The rebellion is led by Hal's mother, and so they kill the king. Hal's mother becomes the new king. Hal becomes the new prince, and they depose Banamora, who used to be the prince and heir of the country. Banamora is of course bitter about this and decides to take back her throne and look for allies elsewhere. But another large part of this story is the relationship between Hal and Lady Hotspur. So these two women have a kind of star-crossed lovers epic romance that is at the center of this story, and this book gets very political. It is about the clashing of kingdoms and who is controlling the throne. Before diving into the rest of the review, I want to mention some content warnings for thoughts of suicide, self-poisoning, and also, of course, violence and murder. They are in the middle of a war. So starting with the world, I love this world that she is writing in. This is set in the same world as her other book, The Queens of Innis, Lear, which was one of my favorite books of 2019. So I loved being back in this world. I think we get to learn a lot more about the world as a whole, but especially about Aramoria and Innis, Lear. I think that for me, I felt like I understood Innis, Lear a lot more after having read this. It kind of splits its time between Aramoria and Innis, Lear, maybe a little bit more time in Aramoria, but there is a significant amount of time on Innis, Lear, which I loved because I love how magical that island feels. But I felt like in this book I really got a better sense for what Innis, Lear looks like and what it feels like, and just more, it felt more tangible to me in this book, which I really loved. We also get a larger scope to this story than there was in The Queens of Innis, Lear, because this is about like clashing kingdoms, multiple countries, making alliances between countries, and we learn more about like who everyone is and who's connected to who, more of the politics of this world. So this is grander in scale, larger in scope. The atmosphere and the writing in this were incredible, which I am not surprised by. I was expecting that because I loved the writing and the atmosphere that were in The Queens of Innis, Lear, and so I think a lot of that is present in this as well. The writing is poetic and beautiful. The atmosphere of Innis, Lear is always incredible. You get this wonderful nature magic from Innis, Lear. You could definitely tell the difference between the atmosphere of being on Innis, Lear and being in Aramoria, because Aramoria is this country that has really turned its back on magic and is kind of feels like it's sort of drained of magic, and so it doesn't have the same kind of atmosphere as Innis, Lear. And then when we're on Innis, Lear, it feels so magical, and I think I love the atmosphere of Innis, Lear, but I also appreciated having that contrast between the two countries, that they truly did feel different. Now, along with the beautiful writing, we also have a very slow plot. So this is a very slow book to read. I personally love a slow book. There were a few times where even for me it dragged, but you know, I think this is one that you just have to go in knowing that it's going to be a slow book, and that it's not really action focused. It's very political, but even the politics are really focusing on the characters and the relationships. So it's one that you really have to just settle in for and be in it for the long game. And with being a slower paced book, as I said, there were a few parts in this where the story kind of dragged for me, and I did have a couple issues with the ending. I don't think the ending was like poorly written. I was just kind of mad about some of the things that happened to some of my favorite characters at the end. I think that my biggest complaint with this book was, though, that I wasn't invested in the main romance in the story. So I mentioned that this is meant to be this kind of epic romance, star-crossed lovers between Hal and Lady Hotspur. And I was like ready for that. I was, I really wanted to be invested and love that, romance and that relationship. But I just couldn't get invested in it. To me, I think it's because it felt like there wasn't enough time spent building the relationship and the dynamic between these two characters. It felt like it just sort of happened, because they essentially, the two of them pretty much like see each other across a battlefield and then just go, I'm in love with you. And it skips straight from that pretty much just straight into them being in a relationship, and then their whole relationship, what we know about it is either them fighting, them having sex, or them pining after each other when they can't be together. And there isn't a lot of time spent like building their relationship and really letting us get to know them and understand what is their dynamic, why do they love each other, why do they work, And I really wanted that. Like, that's the part that I wanted to know. And I just felt like that was missing, and I couldn't get invested in their relationship the way that I wanted to. So I was very disappointed by that. That being said, there were a lot of side characters and side character relationships that I loved. So I still had a lot of characters and character relationships that I was really invested in, whether they were platonic relationships or romantic relationships. Like, she is really able to craft great relationships. I just felt like for some reason it wasn't there for Lady Hotspur and Hal's relationship, which was disappointing. But I loved so many of these characters and I was so invested in them. I mentioned in my wrap-up where I talked about this book that while I was reading this, there was one day when I was commuting into work, and I take the train into work. I have an hour commute each way, and one day I was sitting on the train listening to Cosmic Love by Florence and the Machine, because Florence and the Machine's music goes really well with Tessa Gratton's books. And I just was listening to this one song on repeat, just sitting there being like in my feelings, being really emo about my favorite character in this. And I spent the entire commute, so like an entire hour, just thinking about my favorite character and some of the other characters in this book and how much I love them and just how much they hurt my heart and just make me so sad, but I love them so much. So I hope that that can maybe explain like how connected I felt to these characters and how much I loved them. They were so much like in my heart. So even if there were some characters or character relationships that I was disappointed by, there was still so much richness to these characters, to so many of the other characters, and there were so many characters and relationships that I loved and was so invested in. This book really, it felt like a journey for me. Like, this was really a journey because my opinions about characters changed so many times throughout this book as we learn more about them, see them confronted with different decisions and scenarios. Like, I don't think that my opinion on any single character stayed the same from the beginning of the book to the end. And I loved the journey of it and how much, not just that the characters evolved, but that my understanding of these characters evolved. Now, this book is pitched as being a standalone, but I don't think that it is. I think you really do need to read The Queens of Innis Lear before reading Lady Hotspur. I think they should be treated as a companion series, and this is the second book. Because without having read The Queens of Innis Lear, I think you'll get very confused about what's going on in this, and I think that you won't be as invested. There are a lot of references to characters that are from the Queens of Innis Lear. There are events that you would be spoiled for if you started here and then went back and read the Queens of Innis Lear. And I think you'll have a better concept of the world and be more invested in the world and the characters if you start there. I also think that it made a difference for me, especially at the beginning of the book, because the beginning starts with a rebellion and they're really like throwing around a lot of names of countries and of people to kind of explain like who's on which side, what's going on in the rebellion. They're trying to set the stage for this rebellion, and it makes sense to do that. But even having read the book before this and knowing a little bit about this world and these countries and the politics of it, I was still very confused in those first 50 pages because there were just so many people and names and countries like thrown out there. So I would definitely say read The Queens of Innis Lear first. So I gave this book 4 out of 5 stars. I did really enjoy it. There were a couple of things that I didn't love as much, so it couldn't be like a 5-star, but I still really had a great time reading this, and I'm really excited to read more from this author. I really hope that she writes more in this world because I absolutely adore this world, and I will read anything else that she writes in this world. So that is all for my review of Lady Hotspur by Tessa Gratton. Thank you all for watching, and until next time, bye!